if you have a Shina plywood, sorry, mine's kind of dirty because I'm using the backside of it, my another block. Okay. First step is good. It's good to stain the surface to a different color. Okay. So you can use anything. I'm just using some Higgins India ink here. You can use a watercolor if you want. I'm just diluting a little bit so it doesn't become too saturated. And painting this onto a blank sheet of wood. Okay, it's a little bit still dark, but it's okay. You can skip this. You don't have to. Just for me, this one makes it easy to see where I have carved, where I still remained uncarved. Okay, so in order to make you to visualize what's going on the process of carving, I recommend you to stain the surface with possibly a watercolor or in very thin India ink like this. Okay, right? Okay, so and of course this has to be weighted to dry. Then you can start to draw onto the surface. Okay. Of course, you can start with a pencil drawing, and you can just use only pencil. That's fine too. If you are using a pencil for drawing, use relatively softer pencil rather than very hard pencil. Okay. What I'm holding here is 2B. 2B is probably soft enough so you don't indent the surface. Does it make sense? Some mechanical pencil, sometimes you press hard, you may get some indentation onto the soft surface of the Shina plywood. So maybe you may get some white lines when you're printing. Does it make sense to you guys? Okay, so it's good to have use a little bit softer pencil if you start with a pencil. All right, and of course, if you want to make it a little bit more clear black shapes, it's good to use a Sharpie or even like some black India ink such as Sumi ink. I'm not going to recommend you guys to use a very fine micron pen or something like this, because if you draw something, of course you can draw with this, but eventually, this kind of line is very too thin for you to leave it as relief part of the block. So if I were you, I try something heavier such as Sharpie. So my line I make is not too fine. Does it make sense to you? It doesn't make sense. It's okay. So what I'm saying is when you are drawing on a surface, I want you to have relatively bold line, not very fine line. Otherwise, you'll be very frustrated for the carving process. Okay, is it clear for you guys? So what I did here is I drew with Sharpie, and then I started to fill in with Sumi. But grain does have some texture. So if you put too much of this, it does bleed like this. Yeah, okay? So just I want you to be aware of that. Grain does have some texture. So if you're trying to make very nice shape, sometimes does bleed because of that texture. Okay? So I'm gonna just add a little bit more line here. Sorry, my image is so bad. Looks like I'm using I'm drawing a polka dots and also, sorry, maybe this is a tribute to Edward Van Halen. He was very much like a young star guitarist when I was in high school. And All right, so you can do anything on as long as you are not indenting, and just make sure your shapes are bold enough. Okay, so I'm gonna do a simple carving demo here. Okay, so you can use bench hook. Maybe it's convenient if you have one or if you have checked out from DBC. You don't have to, just be prepared. You may slip on tabletop during carving. One thing, alternatively, I may recommend one more thing. You have this kind of a non-skid. That can be actually good. My coffee. It may just prevent the slipping. Okay, so I want you to have some kind of device during the carving. And maybe some people do not need anything, just you are skillful enough. You don't need anything to stop from sliding, okay? And let's talk about the carving tools, okay? I'll be mainly using a couple of things. One is this one called V-gouge. V-gouge means that
sorry.
This is a V. Sorry, yeah, it's V shape, right? It means there's a sharp corner here, okay? And you may, if you bought a set, it came with a couple of different sizes of a U-gouge. U-gouge is basically, it's more round here, right? It's not as sharp. There's no sharp corners at the case of V-gouge. Okay, so V-gouge, U-gouge, I mainly use something small U-gouge. Okay, one more thing I may not emphasize today, but this is another very useful tool. This is called a hangito. It's basically knife with one side is beveled. Okay, so I mainly use those three things for my carving. Okay, all right. So let's talk about carving. So where you carve is where, if you are intending to have those patterns to be printed, the black, if you want those black to be printed, where you are going to carve, pink is where you carve, right? So you are basically, you'll be carving negative shapes, negative space of black, which is pink. Okay, so anything you may find it easy to start with a V-gouge, which is you can use around the edges. Am I blocking? No, right. Around the edges. And when you do this, make sure you are carving away from you. Does it make sense? I've never been going towards, my knife is never been aiming towards me. Okay? Why is that? So I am actually going like that. And so in a way you are always rotating the block, because some direction, instead of you go like this, instead of going like that, you are actually rotating the block itself. Okay? Okay, and never have your finger in front of that towards that direction. Okay, this is not good. Eventually, you're gonna stab yourself, your finger, and then you have a bleed. Okay. Every semester, if it's an in-class studio art class, every semester there's some students need a Band-Aid. Oh yeah, I forgot to ask, you guys should have Band-Aid in this class. So V-gouge can be very good tool for carving all these edges of the negative shape, right? Okay. Afterwards, you may want to make this area entire negative shape to be carved out. So you'll be actually carving with a U-gouge this time. starting with the V gouge for outer, just the edges, and then I'm taking more out by U gouge. Okay, so U gouge, depending on how big the area is, you may find easier to do a small U gouge, right? Or, I don't have time, take more out faster. Are you guys okay? Are you guys seeing my demo okay? Or in your site? Okay. So probably this is probably very easy way of explaining how you start and how you gouge, right? So maybe one thing you may think about when you are gouging like this, it's never been totally clear here. Means you may get a little bit of a gouging marks, means some kind of texture here, right? So when you are inking, all these gouging marks does often pick up some ink. Does it make sense? They become part of your image.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So often it's a little bit thinking, good idea to think of which direction you want to carve. Okay, maybe one direction, and also one direction can be a little bit easier than another direction because of the grain of wood. Okay, so just I want you to pay attention when you are gouging to make the white space. Often it's not totally white. You may get some texture like this to be part of your image. So I want you to just pay a little bit attention to that. Okay. So I'm gonna do one more time here. If you draw with such a small fine pen like that, right? It's quite difficult for you guys to leave that fine skinny line as the relief part of the block. So, I mean, you can do it, you can try that. You can try to have very skinny line, but often it's a little bit difficult if you are first time trying. That's why it's good to start with a little bit more bold. For the second shape here. All right, and again, I'm using the U gouge. And I find that this side is easier for me because grain runs this way. All right. So one more tool I'm gonna introduce is this hangito. It's a knife with one beveled edge. Sometimes it's scary to people who are doing for the first time, and some people, oh, I can handle that. So depends on how you do it, how you feel. Some people never use this. Some people just use a V gouge, and that somehow substitutes this function too. But let me just start to show how I use this one. Okay, instead of the V gouge, I could be using this hangito knife. Okay, and this is again where you start carving for the edge. I'm holding like this with my palm, and do you see that bevel side? Bevel side is actually touching the relief side. Okay, do you see the bevel side? It's facing to the relief line. So if you go like this, okay, here, all right. but it's not necessarily making any white line, right? It's just basically just I'm cutting some thread. And then using a U gouge or V gouge, when you carve this direction, the curve actually stops there. So with a knife, you're actually making a stopping point of your carving. V gouge. And actually, after you using a knife, your V gouge also can go in very easily too. See that it's actually stopping there because I put some kind of, I already put some kind of stopping point by putting using knife. Okay, so what I was talking about here is, let me show what I'm talking about, okay? So do you see this illustration on the right side, right? You see these three different edges here. Let me just make it a little bit bigger here. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Right? So top one is a ideal way of carving relief. Bottom two are not as good. The bottom one is actually a worse one. The difference is this angle you are creating, right? So why you think this is a better carving than those two?
Because the ink doesn't build up down at the bottom of the cut of the relief.
I see. That can be one of the reasons too, but I don't think that's the main reason for this. Remember, when you are printing, you'll be adding some pressure to the entire surface, right? So probably this is actually good, wide enough, but think about this is actually a very skinny line you are trying to leave, right? And both have kind of underneath of that can be chipped off, right? So always they talk about this angle, and in order to memorize to yourself, Japanese carver always say, think about Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji has this kind of a top with this angle, right? So think about Mount Fuji as ideal way of carving, okay? So again, when you are using the knife, this beveled side should be touching the printing area. Does it make sense? Okay. So you can go a little bit angle. You can actually go straight and still you can get this beveled angle. Okay, you don't have to actually tilt it like this. Okay, but our idea is always having a top slightly smaller than bottom of that curved line. Okay, so let's see. Let me go back to my demo here again. So what I'm here saying is bevel side is actually facing to that. Difficult to show. Right, that's right. Yeah, good. Yeah, Jane Fisher just said bevel side should be facing to the black. It's a little bit scary process because you are almost like stabbing something, right? It's a little bit scary if you're first time trying, and your hand is actually can be injured if you are not careful, okay? But if you have V-gouge already have that angle. Think about that. V-gouge already have that angle. So many people think, okay, I don't need a knife. I can just use this V-gouge for the edge and already creating that necessary angle for the relief. Okay. So it's really up to you. I actually like occasionally, many times I like using this one because I don't create, my gouging marks actually doesn't stop. It goes all the way to the end of that shape. So for example here, if I use a V-gouge, I will create some kind of white blank line here. Sometimes I don't like that. Here is all, I use a knife and then use a U-gouge to make that carve the negative space. Does it make sense to you? Okay, so I guess you have to all try and everybody has to find your own comfortable way of carving. Okay, all right.